I can type in, give me a training plan on whatever AI you want to, and it'll spit you out a training plan. But I even had a guy came to me and said, yeah, I just spent the last year wasting my whole entire year because I tried to use this AI plan that I created on ChatGPT, and it totally didn't work, and it wasted my year. Like,
if you're enjoying the show and want to take the next step in your training, join our newsletter and receive a free 4-week sample training plan. Head on over to uphillathlete.com/letsgo, and once you sign up, you'll instantly get a link to try out some of our most popular training plans. It's a great way to get a feel for how we train our athletes for big mountain goals. Check it out at uphillathlete.com/letsgo. That's uphillathlete.com/LETSGO. Welcome to the Uphill Athlete Podcast. I'm your host today, Steve House. And today with me here is Hunter Allen, who's a rare guest who's been inside multiple technology revolutions within endurance sports. He helped make the power meter usable as a coaching tool in the late 90s and 2000s. And he also co-built TrainingPeaks, who all of our listeners are well familiar with that platform by now. He's also recently written about the latest contender for game-changing technology, the continuous glucose monitor. He's also a cycling coach. He doesn't do much coaching of mountain sports, so he's a great person for us to talk to exchange ideas with, because we work in parallel but different realms, but we both share a passion for technology and helping people and helping them understand how to improve. So what I want to really dig into with Hunter today is this idea of technology in training. What is worth wearing? What data is worth tracking? What is worth or even important to ignore? And how do we think about these sort of hype and disillusionment cycles like we've seen with a lot of technology that's come along in the last couple of decades? And he's got an incredible vantage point as having lived through a lot of this. So Hunter, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
no, thank you so much, Steve. It's an honor and a pleasure. You know, I've followed your mountaineering climbing career for years and years when after I retired from pro cycling and got hard into climbing. And so I remember seeing your name and pictures all over all the magazines. So it's a great honor to be here.
Well, it's a great honor for us to have you. And you know, those feel like another lifetime, but it was a great lifetime. I really enjoyed it, as I'm sure you enjoyed your racing and training on the bike all those years. Pretty great to have that. I'm like, I don't know about you, but I sort of feel like the reverse retirement plan was a pretty good approach. Like I did all my sports and playing and dumping it all, putting it all out there, until I was until my 40s, and then I kind of shifted gears into a different kind of life.
And then you got a real job.
Yeah, exactly. Actually creates some value for people in the world. That's a good feeling too. I wanted to, you once said this great line, putting a power meter on your bike doesn't make you go faster. I just want to kind of surface that and talk about what you saw in the power meter revolution. Let's go back. What year was it? What was happening? What was the platform like TrainingPeaks at that time? Kind of give me a little background.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. It was one of those really serendipitous things where one of my athletes back in 1999 came along and said, hey, I've got this newfangled power meter. Would you train me with it? And I was like, I guess I have no idea what 300 watts means.
Interesting.
Blah, blah, blah. I don't know, but I'll try. And I didn't have those things when I was a pro in the mid 90s. So and it really soon after, I realized wow, if I'm going to really understand this, I need to buy one of these and have a real clear connection personally to these numbers and feel how this, what's 500 watts up a hill. And so I started training again a bit and getting into it. And then, in, I believe year 2000, there was a first ever power meter seminar, and it was in Philadelphia. USA Cycling organized it. The co-author of my book, our book, Training and Racing with a Power Meter, Dr. Coggin, was there. And then another guy, Dr. Alan Lim, who owns Scratch Labs, And
Sure.
then Dean Golich, who's been a longtime coach and really well known in cycling world too. And they presented and they kind of like said the whole time, the software is no good. The software is no good. This is the revolution, but we don't have a way to analyze this data. And so my client at the time, Kevin Williams was his name. And Kevin said to me, at lunchtime, hey man, I'm a programmer. We can build software. I can do this. And I was like, what? Really? And he's like, yeah, this is what I do. And so Kevin and I started.
That's serendipitous.
Yeah, it was really cool. And so we started building TrainingPeaks software is what we called it originally. And we just kind of played around with it for a while. And then we launched that. Finally, we got serious about it, launched it in 2003. And that, we thought, we'll sell 100 copies or whatever. Well, we sold a lot more than that, which was awesome. And we're like, wow, this is really cool. And it just became the gold standard in analysis of power data, and nobody had put that together yet. So that was TrainingPeaks, and then Joe Friel and Dirk Friel had a company called TrainingBible.com, based after Joe Friel's The Cyclist Training Bible. And they were doing really an online thing to try and, work with coaches and planning and all this stuff. And so that was really fun. And so we basically just kind of merged the companies together. So TrainingPeaks, Training Bible became TrainingPeaks. And so that happened 2005. And we just kept on going from there. And it was one of these things where, it was like it was a newfangled tech device. And it was really interesting. Steve, we think of tech kind of trickling down. You look at I love Formula One, so I watch Formula One all the time, and you look at all these new things that are on the Formula One cars, and eventually that stuff kind of trickles down into regular cars, like just paddle shifters on the steering wheel, right? Formula One had that in 96. It was like a really long time before regular cars had those things. But in the power meter world, it actually trickled up. And it was really interesting because the people who adopted power meters were all of the engineers and the math guys and the statisticians and the people who were really into numbers. And they're like, man, this makes total sense to me. And so these are all these master riders, category 3, 4 riders, beginner riders. And all the pros were like, we don't need that. Nobody's going to use that stuff. And so then all of a sudden it kind of trickled up to the pro level, and then the pros started using them. And then once the pros started using them, there was a switch that kind of happened. I think it was like 2008, maybe 2009. So it took a while. That's 6 years. All of a sudden, 2009, every magazine I opened up, there was a picture of a pro and he had a power meter on his bike. And it was like, okay, it was then at that point, then it became the trickle down piece for all the people who hadn't adopted them yet, now got them. So it was a really unique way that this tech went, non-traditional way.
If you could rewind to 2003 and reintroduce this technology to the world, like what would you do different?
Oh man, that's a great question. I don't know. We did it. We fumbled around a bit. But we did it really well and it came off really well. I'm not sure I would change too much, because we were using the tech of the time. So, we built a universal downloader. Basically there was like 5 different power meters, maybe 4 or 5 at the time. I think 4 actually. And none of them had a way to download the data. And so now it's super easy, right? You just push stop and save on your Garmin. It pushes up to the cloud and it's instantly in your TrainingPeaks,
Yeah.
I remember telling somebody, and I don't know when it was, 2008 or something. I'm like, this is coming. One day you're going to walk in your garage, you're going to push save, and it's going to connect to your Wi-Fi, and it's just going to be instantly inside TrainingPeaks. And they're like, what? That'll never happen.
That'll never happen. Exactly. Look at us now, right?
Right. So that was a really important thing that we made because it allowed everybody to buy any power meter they wanted and download it into our software, which TrainingPeaks became what's called WKO Plus now, or WKO software, which stands for workout. And so, I think that that would have been, I mean, I just don't know if I would change anything, to be honest, Steve.
Yeah, that's a great answer too. And so I want to go, because what you really did is you wrote the book well before people had adopted this. And I mean, according to my research, you guys sold like 300,000 copies. Am I off by much here?
I think somewhere between 300 and 400, depending on what copies you count, whether Audible counts as one or not.
Let's count it. I mean, let's just say like, that's amazing. Those are amazing numbers for any book. Right. And so you really, it really started with education, which I think is
Yes.
super interesting. What comes from that, though, and this kind of leads into the next thing I want to understand, is like the human aspect of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the power meters went mainstream in cycling, as you said, it started this trickle down part. Did athletes start behaving differently from your point of view, or from your vantage both as an observer, as a coach, as a cyclist yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And how did that manifest in the actual behavior of people?
Right. So, and then this is also kind of one of these things that's, we didn't set out to do it. When Andy and I wrote the first edition, which came out in 2006, we had just gotten really tired of answering the same email over and over.
Exactly. Right. So many books were bored by this.
Oh God, it's so many emails, and so I started writing articles and putting them on a blog site. And then all of a sudden I realized like, oh, hey, we actually have a book and we have a system that we can do.
Yeah.
And so that was what really changed the thinking and the training philosophy. And again, we didn't set out to like, oh man, we're going to change the world, and like change all of cycling's principles of power of training at all. And we just set out to say, hey, this is how you use this device. And these are the steps that are really clear and they're really simple. And anybody can do it if you follow step 1 through 7. And so once people grasped that, like once they saw it written in a book and they started reading it, and then our second book came out in 2009, or the second edition came in 2009. Then all of a sudden it was like, oh, I just buy one of these and I do these steps and I'm training with a power meter. And we're like, yes, You're now training with a power meter. So that's what people really did change. Like all of a sudden they were looking at their numbers on their power meters. They're doing intervals to hold specific numbers. They're trying to hit certain numbers up a hill, or and we're trying to we've categorized ourselves in what's called the power profile chart. Like, how do you fit against the world's best? Right? And so, what's your phenotype? Are you a sprinter? Are you a climber? Are you a time trialist? So we started to categorize those things, but. Yeah, dramatic changes in how people change their training.
What were some of the kind of failure modes you saw in terms of the human interaction? What did people do wrong with the technology initially?
Yeah, I think that initially it was one of those things where they just didn't. It was back to the education piece. They just didn't understand like that you could use it for so many different ways, right? You could use it in a way to guide you in your interval, right? Okay, here's my 5-minute interval. I can use it that way. Then you could use it in a way to look at your entire ride, like, okay, how many watts did I average? What my kilojoule usage created, some key metrics there. And then the piece was, and I still struggle with this a little bit, to be honest, but which is the real magic, is the aggregation of that data. And so being able to see like, oh, what's happened historically? Because ultimately what I wanted to do was I wanted to be able to back calculate everything to create an athlete's peak, right? And the magic of coaching, as you know, right? It's like, I can give anybody a training plan and they're going to get better, right? Here's a training plan. Go do this, go do structure training, you're going to get better. But the real holy grail of coaching is when somebody says, okay, on June the 5th, I want to have the best ride of my life, or I want to have the best climb of my life, or I want to have the best run of my life on that day, is you get them to peak on that day, right?
Yeah.
That's the holy grail of coaching. And so I wanted to be able to figure out, like, how does that work? And so that was one of those things where, like, I still struggle with that a little bit, where people still don't understand, like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, we look at all this data, we see how this is going to go, and we start to plan. So planning this peak to happen.
Yeah, and planning the taper and planning like the response, the body's response to the training. One of the things that I noticed purely as an observer, I've never actually ridden with a power meter. I've ridden road bikes for training just to accrue lots of volume and that kind of thing. I've observed that people kind of, the number becomes more important than the feeling in their body. And I'm sure you've seen this. And how do you coach around this? How would you tell people when you sense that they're like prioritizing a number and a readout over, maybe how they're feeling? How does that manifest, and what do you tell them?
Yeah, that's the big challenge, right? The paralysis by analysis and just the over emphasis on those numbers. And a little quick anecdote, and training with these things isn't for everybody. It just really isn't. I once had a very, very talented athlete. She was one of the world's best ultra endurance mountain bikers. And she wanted to win the La Ruta race. La Ruta de Conquistadores, the mountain bike race across Costa Rica. And, so we got our power meter, and one day she calls me up and she's in tears on the phone, just sobbing and crying. And, and I'm like, oh my God, she always rode with her dog, and it was like somebody hit her dog or she ran over her dog. And I'm just like, I have just like all these visions of what happened. And I'm like, what? I got her calmed down, and finally like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And she's like, I was supposed to do 190 watts for 2x20s, and I only did 187, And I was like, oh God, just like
we created a monster. Yeah.
We created a monster. And
I mean, not her, the technology.
The technology. And so it just was, it's sent her in this spiral if she didn't succeed every time exactly, and not understanding like, oh, you're still training the same system, right? You're still training your lactate threshold system. This is just a way to ensure that you are. And yeah, if you hit 187, it's no difference from a training perspective and adaptation phase than anywhere else. So, I said, okay, well, I talked to her boyfriend, who now is her husband. And I said, hey, you're just going to put a piece of tape over her power meter. And then she's going to hand it to you when she comes home from training, and you're going to download it and you're going to send it to me. And that's what he did. And then we came up with a system of ways to talk about it. Like, I had to come up with, super hard, right? Gave her some
an RPE kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. Some RPE. So I think that's an issue. And so when you have somebody like that and they get sucked in so much, and, you just have to say, hey, look, remember your goal is to do your best. And whether you're doing these intervals, whether you're doing a race, whether you're doing whatever it is, and at the end of the day, right, you just need to say, you know what, I did my best. And if your heart rate is slammed to the ceiling and you're doing the power you can do, then you're doing your best on that day. The caveat being, well, if you aren't hitting the numbers and you had a heavy training load, then maybe that means you need to rest. Like, hey, let's just stop the training and let's rest now.
Yeah. And the other thing I've told people is, hey, like, I could have I may have created the number wrong. Like, we don't use power meters, but like maybe it's heart rate or whatever. Like, and it's like 190 and it was supposed to be 187. It's like 190 might have been wrong. Like, you might have been like, So there's, I think people also think that as coaches, we're infallible and that we have some magic ball and know precisely exactly like to the watt what they should, or to the heart rate, what they should be doing. And the reality is, like, as you said, the physiology is going to be what it's going to be on that day. And the important thing is to be training the system that the workout is aiming to train. So yeah, that's a good lesson, I think, to remind people of.
Yeah. I mean, I talk to people all the time, like, this is about, understanding what your perceived exertion is, understanding what those wattage numbers mean at that perceived exertion, looking at your heart rate. Your heart rate, I call it the intensity of your intention. So heart rate tells us how hard we're trying. Right. So it's the intensity of your intention. It's like, oh man, if somebody sends me a power file and their power goes up to 200 watts and it flatlines and goes across with no heart rate data there, I'm like, oh, I don't know if it's an endurance ride. I don't know if they're at their threshold. I have no idea. But if they send me a power file that's 200 watts and their heart rate's 178, just nailed to the ceiling, like, oh man, they were just killing it as hard as they could go. So that may be close to their FTP or whatever. So, we've got to have that metric as well, because then that gives us, again, the intensity of your intention.
For those that might not know, what is FTP?
Functional threshold power. So functional threshold power. So this means this is basically a quasi steady state power where you ride at for around 60 minutes. Doesn't have to be exactly 60 minutes. And it's the highest power that you can maintain for that period of time. And when you go above that, then you start to fatigue. You can't hold it longer. And when you stay below it, you can just go for an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever. So, athletes will go out and they'll test their FTP, their functional threshold power, by doing a 60-minute test. That's the gold standard. Or they can do what we call a 20-minute effort, but they have to do a 5-minute effort before, because if you do just a 20-minute by itself, it contains enough anaerobic work capacity, the ability to do hard work for 0 to 2 minutes or so. That is just enough right there that it would skew your number high. So what we do is we do a 5-minute blowout and then take 5 minutes easy and then do this 20-minute test. And then we subtract 5% from the 20-minute number. And that gives you really close to what you could probably do for your 60 minutes.
Yeah, I find it personally that not too many of my athletes can mentally push that hard for 60 minutes unless they're in a race.
Yes.
And they have that like environment around them that, they've got to keep up or they've got to beat someone or whatever. I think that's like the psychology piece of that I always found interesting.
Yeah.
And you and I have both done these tests ourselves too. Like it's like 60 minutes can feel like a long time at the time.
Yeah, it is. Right. It is. I know. Yeah, it really is. It is. It's a mental thing, right? It's mental toughness, and it's you got to learn to suffer. And how can you suffer right on the limit for 60 minutes? And you and I are, and all the people listening here, right? We're talking to the choir, but it's so interesting when you meet somebody who's not fit, right? And in our little world, right? I mean, I'm very fortunate, right? All the people around me are always very, very fit, and I live in this rosy cone of endurance sports, and
right.
But then I'll meet somebody who's not, and they'll like be huffing and puffing at the top of the stairs, and get to the top of the stairs, like, oh, I got to take a break. And I'm like, well, actually, you can just keep going and breathe hard. Like, I can breathe way harder than that, and I can do it for like 60 minutes or maybe 2 hours.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a reframe. When you were kind of running the WKO division, which is sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of the desktop division of the analysis end of TrainingPeaks for what, like a decade or more. What I'm curious is there something that you saw from that sort of 20,000 foot view of data, lots and lots of data flowing through that platform that you learned that maybe you wouldn't have learned if you were just looking at one athlete at a time?
Oh, whew. I mean, there were so many insights. Steve. I mean,
Mm.
that was massive. And, that I think, the fact that we were able to see so many different athletes and how that they, responded to training and,
Mm-hmm.
where some athletes need to have more freshness coming into an event. Some athletes needed to actually have some fatigue coming into the event. Some, athletes, and then this nut still isn't cracked. And I think that probably the AI could do it. But where there are periods of our training in our season when we recover faster than other times. So like, you may be in a period of training where like, oh gosh, from January to February, you're actually doing the work and you're recovering really fast. But then something happens. And now in March, okay, you can do the training, but now you're not recovering as fast and you may need an extra day off. And maybe it's not the cumulative amount of training. Maybe it's something else, And so being able to adjust some of the parameters to help us as coaches to say, actually, hey, wow, red flag. Athlete Joe now has gone into this slower phase of recovery. You need to back off a little bit. And that nut hasn't been cracked yet. And I've always wanted to, I know that that's there. And I'm like, oh man, how do we do that? And, I think that now maybe if, there's some AI tools that probably were going to come out in the next couple of years that I bet you will be able to see some stuff like that come from.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's so interesting. And one of the statements you made is how if you give a bunch of athletes the same workout, they all respond to it in different ways and they all need different amounts of time to recover and be ready for the next one and so on. And I think that this is one of the things that generally people who are new to training just don't understand. They think that training is just a recipe, that everybody follows the same recipe works for everyone, and they kind of come to it with the skepticism of what a coach even does. And I think that is fundamentally what a coach does. We both coached a lot of athletes, and it's pretty clear to us pretty soon when working with an athlete where those levers, where those dials are and how they need to be set. And to your point, like that they need to change over time. It's actually kind of what keeps it interesting.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And I think that's where, to me, I think that's where, kind of go back to the AI thing, right? That's a thing. It's like, well, oh man, I can type in a training plan, give me a training plan on whatever AI you want to, and it'll spit you out a training plan. But, it doesn't have any clue like what's going on in your history and how you recover and your life and all this stuff. And I mean, it just is a huge, massive swag, with people who are trying to do this. And it's like, it just doesn't work, and so that's, I even had a guy, just started up with coaching with me, and came to me and said, yeah, I just spent the last year wasting my whole entire year because I tried to use this AI plan that I created on ChatGPT and it totally didn't work and it wasted my year. I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yep. It looks like it knows what it's doing, right? Like that's deceptive because if you're not an expert, this is where people need to remember. I said this to a lot of athletes in the last 6 months. And you remember it's artificial general intelligence. It doesn't have specific knowledge and it's a predictive algorithm. It's just predicting the most likely, and it's from its training data, what is the most likely next output, whether that's a word or a number. It's not thinking. And I think people have a hard time still understanding the limitations of that because it does seem magical, right? Like, we've all been blown away by some of these things that AI is doing these days. So back to sort of this hype disillusionment cycle, I'd say that power meters are in the steady state phase, clearly, where there's probably like a predictable adoption cycle for someone who's getting into training for cycling, whatever kind of cycling they're doing. And that's just part of the path. Like, what do how long did that take, and what actually marked that transition? Was it that moment, like when the pros started using it, as you explained, I don't know, 2009-ish, or was there like something else?
That's a great question. I think it was probably a little bit past 2009 because, we had, in 2009 with TrainingPeaks, we came out with the performance manager chart where we were charting chronic training load, acute training load, and what we call training stress balance. And so that took a while to really, for people to understand that. And our book came out in 2009, and I wrote a chapter on what that meant, how to use that. So it probably was a little longer than that. It probably was 2011 or so, 2012, when finally at the point it was like, okay, not only now do we have more power meter manufacturers in the space, that also made a difference, right? It was like, oh, we're just SRM and Power Tap. Now we have the SRAM Quark power meter. We started to see Garmin jumping in there with their pedals, so all of a sudden some of these things started to really, brought the prices down a little bit more. It made it more affordable. There started to be some crank manufacturers that came in stages, the single arm crank that's like, oh man, now you can get one of these for $300. So I think it was really more of a price point actually that allowed it to get to a place where then it was just universal. Oh man, if you're a serious cyclist and you care about improving, then you got to have a power meter. Like, I mean, that's just you're going to drink water bottle, you're going to have that power meter kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So the transition was really marked by the democratization of the technology in terms of just reaching a price and enough competitors that it reached and enough volume for all to support all those competitors that they could produce them at a price that more people could afford.
Yep. Totally.
Interesting. Yeah. When did people and what did people learn to ignore about power data?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an individual thing where each person, they get to kind of that, that cycle themselves where they understand, the first thing you do is you get a power meter and you realize, oh wow, these numbers fluctuate like crazy. So how do I understand this information? And then you start to understand how you use it and look at it and see what you're doing while you're riding. And then at a certain point you decide, okay, you know what? I need to make sure that, when I'm just out here and I'm riding my bicycle at endurance pace, I'm not looking at these numbers second by second. I'm just merely using it as a governor. And it's like, I'm glancing down every once in a while. So, I need to keep it under 200 watts today. And so all of a sudden you at a certain point of that process, maybe 6 months or a year, even after buying one of these devices, you come to this realization of like, okay, here's how I'm going to use this. Now, okay, when I've got a very specific interval, okay, I'm going to go after it. But if not, then I'm just out riding. Okay, yeah, whatever. If I'm doing a really important tempo work where I've got to ride for 3 hours at tempo, then I'm using it as a not as a governor, but to here's my basement. I want to go under 250 watts. I got to hold 250 watts or higher the whole time. And so then that, I think, made it a difference there. And so I think that probably happens for each person around that time.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's like you have that personal connection with the device, right? And I think that's back to our talk about rate of perceived exertion and understanding what it feels like, and then associating that feels like number with your data. And once you have that personal connection and that connection is really solidified, then at that point, and I think that takes 6 months, or even a year. So yeah,
totally agree. Yeah. I want to we're going to get to continuous glucose monitoring, but before we do, I want to kind of walk through some of these different categories of tech and just kind of get your take on them as someone who's, like I said, been through these tech cycles a number of times. First up, I think, is you're going to not be surprised. Let's talk about HRV, whether it's coming from an Oura ring or a Whoop device or it's Garmin native. Is this how do you integrate this? How do you talk to your athletes about it? I don't want to we don't have to go full black or white. It's not necessarily real signal or horoscope. I think there's a lot of gray to most of this technology. So where do you use HRV?
Yeah. I think it's a great metric. I think it's a great metric because I think that it gives us the picture of life stress, right? I think it's probably one of the best from that perspective. It just fills that hole. And I think that's something that we don't have any other way to measure life stress. And so I think it's a valid thing. I mean, I've seen it. I've saved a bunch of people's seasons because of it. There's a couple of charts in WKO that overlay that on top of other charts, and so they're pulling that number in. And all of a sudden, we're starting to see this trend that's just like boom going in the basement, and it's not so easy to see from the tree view, but from looking at the forest view, it's like, oh wow, all of a sudden now, what's happening here? You're training really well and things are going well, but all of a sudden your HRV has just gone through the basement. Something else is going on. We need to stop, right? And so whatever that is, and it doesn't matter. It's just this is a great signal, a leading indicator. I think it's also a good indicator too of when you are recovered. And it's like, oh, okay. When can I? Okay, yeah, of course. I'm going to train hard no matter what, and I'm going to do hard intervals, and there are multiple days that I'm going to stack together, and so I'm just going to be tired on the fifth day or whatever that I'm doing.
Right. Expect that.
And that's, you still train, right? You still got to do training when you're in that phase of just doing a huge block. So you don't
be able to overreach.
Yeah, you don't necessarily let that guide you, but it's like, well, okay, at the end of that huge block, then okay, what day does it start to rebound? And that guides a bit of this. Okay, well, it took 5 days, or it took 4 days, or it took 2 days, or it took 8 days, and now it's time to start getting back after it again. So I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. One of the things, I talked to Dr. Marco Altini, who you may know, who's done a bunch of work on HRV, and one of his takeaways that I thought was really good that I've incorporated is just has people measure it in the same way at the same time every day. And that's helped me get better readings from the athletes I work with, because we are working with athletes remotely, obviously. And one of the really interesting things now that I've figured that out, maybe I'm late to the party here, is that I've figured that out, and I've been able to use it to look at what you were describing earlier, where athletes go through periods where they may recover faster and periods where they may recover more slowly. I actually think some of it's seasonal. Winter, it feels like, a lot of times athletes are recovering more slowly. It could be the moon phase. I don't have any idea, but I've been able to look back and see these things in hindsight and be like, oh, okay, he used to recover after this little block of, I don't know, a few back-to-back hard days. He was back in 2 days. Now it's taking 4. That's a way to kind of quantify that, because one of the mistakes I think people make is trying to compare it to others, or compare it to, I think this is part of the adoption cycle, where a lot of times people, and I've been victim of this myself, I've been guilty of this myself, where it becomes part of my identity. It's like, what was your HRV score this morning? Mine was better than yours. Sleep score, I'm going to get to it in a second. What was your sleep score? We're all bragging about our sleep scores now, trying to outdo each other. And it's and then we kind of get through that. It's that's it's part of the ego. And then it becomes part of oh yeah, this is this thing. This is how I use it. This is how I interpret it. It just becomes something to do, and less about, bragging or that kind of thing. Let's talk about sleep tracking, because almost every device is doing it now. What do you feel is actually actionable? What is declaration? What is hype? Where are we in the cycle?
Yeah. I like the fact that we're tracking sleep. I think that that's really good. I think it's a very challenging thing to track sleep with these wrist devices and
Yeah,
hand
agreed.
devices. I mean, there has been, just like you, right? There's been many a time I've laid in bed and read on my Kindle at between 1 and 3 a.m. because I can't sleep and it says I'm sleeping, and wake up and you got a great sleep score. You slept all night. And I'm like, no, actually I didn't.
No, I hate to bring it to you.
So, that I think is, they're just not that accurate, from that perspective. I think unless you want to wear a band around your chest and have a real sleep tracker, then that's what you're going to have. But, otherwise, I think they're a good big picture view thing. I think that's where, looking at your big picture and looking at the trend is better. So saying, okay, gosh, my sleep is trending downward. Why am I not getting quite so much sleep? Is that something that I'm doing? Is that some part of my training? Is that some outside stress is going on? So looking at those things, looking at your REM length and looking at your deep sleep length again, as an average over a period of days, not just saying, okay, well, that night was messed up because it was wrong, but looking at it over a period of days, and if I can get my athletes to sleep an hour and a half of REM and an hour and a half of deep, then that's a really good amount. Like I have a lot of people perform really, really well when they get an hour and a half of each of those on an average over 7 to 14 days. So I like it. I think it's, you just have to be careful with some of the little pitfalls there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree on the device trap there. There's some things that are promising, I think, more than they can deliver. What about respiration wear? We have this, time wear, similar, obviously the argument is a breath is more honest, if you will, than heart rate under conditions like heat, caffeine, fatigue. Does the evidence support that? Have you played with it? Where do you think this is in the kind of hype disillusionment and adoption cycle?
Well, I mean, to me, I think this is, and I worked with a company, probably 6-7 years ago before the Time one came out, helping them develop theirs, and they've never been able to do anything with it. But, I learned a lot about it. And, I think this is a really great metric. I think that you could actually replace heart rate with your minute ventilation rate, if you had it on your screen of your bicycle computer or running or whatever. And it would be like you say, right? It's just not, is a response, just like heart rate is a response, but it's not susceptible to how much caffeine you had and all this stuff. I think from a mountaineering climbing perspective, it's probably superior to everything, right? I think that the potential there is massive to be able to say, gosh, if you have this, and you're tracking your minute ventilation, your respiration rate, and you're looking at this and you're trying to stay below a certain, rate, or you're trying to get to a certain rate, in your training. But once you're on the mountain, then now you're using this as a guide for you. And I think it has a tremendous potential for that.
Yeah, I agree. We've been playing with it a lot internally, and we've been discussing it a lot internally as our own coaching team, trying to understand how we're all using it and what people are seeing. And I think it's still early days there. But I agree. And just from my own personal experience, and I think this is very intuitive, and you've been up to high altitude and done big mountain stuff. And, my respiratory rate at a very high altitude is obviously very high. And frankly, much of the work that my heart muscle is doing is just to supply my respiratory muscles. Even if I'm just standing there or sitting there, like I'm still like having to breathe really hard. And so I think that there is some sort of fundamental truth into that we just haven't figured out quite how to measure it, what exactly all the things mean, and how to I think it's sort of a good analogy with, your power meters. Is like, we have the ability to measure this stuff, but like figuring out what it means and how we take action against the data is a whole nother puzzle that has yet to be put together.
Yeah. I mean, and I would probably apply similar things and similar thinking from, training the power meter to this. And that was what I was thinking about, heavily when I was, involved with this one company that was working on their device, was like, there's got to be, zones, right? And so these are minute ventilation zones. And so then all of a sudden it's like, wow, I need to train to a certain place because I need to get to this respiratory rate, and I need to hold it, and I need to be here for a certain period of time in order to get ready for, this training, this big mountain that I'm going to climb or whatever. So I think that there's absolutely a place where you could, apply a really similar formula, to like power training. It's like, okay, look, all right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to go testing. Right. Let's capture some data and let's go test you. Like, okay. And so we need to do some testing protocols. What's that going to be? Okay. Well, we're going to test each of these zones, and we're going to test what your minute ventilation is at what we call your threshold. We're going to test your VO2 max, and we're going to extrapolate all these other ones in there. And then, okay, now, Steve, I want you to go and do 2 times 20 minutes uphill running or whatever. And I want you to be in this respiratory zone. And I think that would be really easy to apply. And then you say, okay, now we know where you are. And then when you do go to a big mountain, then at the same time you say, oh gosh, this is what I'm at right now. God, I'm in zone 3 and I'm just sitting here at freaking base camp,
Yeah.
So
and then 2 weeks later, you're adapted.
You're back in zone 1. You're like, I'm totally acclimatized, right?
Right.
So I think I think it's got a lot of potential there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one of the really interesting things, I have a pet theory, and I'm just going to throw this out here to the universe, that a lot of the training at normal baric hypoxia, like the people going to the gyms where the altitude at the gym is whatever, 12,000 feet or something like that. And there's a bit of a build out of these facilities, feels like lately. A lot of the training effect of that is actually that you just have to breathe harder, and you're sort of training your respiratory muscles. And so when you go out of that environment, then you get better respiration. And let's be honest, like oxygen is fundamental to the whole process of aerobic endurance. And so if you're getting better respirations and you're just better oxygenating your blood supply, you're performing better. And it has not as very much to do with the quote unquote altitude in these training facilities as much as it does to do with the fact that your respiratory musculature is being trained and conditioned in a way that is allowing these adaptations to make the muscle stronger. Yeah,
I'd buy that theory. I like it.
Okay. Well, we'll chalk that up. Anybody wants to write to, I don't know how we can work this out. Let us know. And this is a great segue, because this is a data point that we use a fair bit at Uphill Athlete that I don't know if your guys use with cycling very much, but pulse oxygenation. And one of the things that we are doing is we're coaching people who are doing both the normal baric hypoxic training, but also the normal baric hypoxic sleeping in the tent, like the Hypoxico tent. And we're using pulse ox data, to adapt their exposure plus time and the simulated altitude. And these are the different variables. One of the really interesting things with this is how I thought like the individual response to training was varied. Like the individual response to these stressors is just really all over the map. Like you can have like people, like 10 people go to quote unquote altitude in an hypoxic tent over 14 days, and they are all different.
Wow.
All of them are different. And so it's very interesting. I mean, they all adapt, but just in very different rates at different, like they need, it's very, I'd say finicky. And I think we're still in the early stages of understanding exactly which, like, because the metrics are like, what is your pulse ox? Like that's going to actually vary. If you're at, let's say 4,000 meters and you and I are both sleeping at 4,000 meters, our pulse ox are going to be different because we're just different, humans, different bodies. Then the altitude is going to, and the progress of altitude, sleeping altitude, it may vary. You could put everybody, you could do a controlled study and put everybody on the same rate, but then the, how quickly they adapt to those altitudes and those simulated altitudes is just really different.
Wow.
Have you done any work with that?
Yeah, I mean, just really small amounts because, like we just don't use them in cycling. And I've coached a few mountain climbers over the years, and I've done some mountains myself. So I only have a handful of experiences with that. But I agree. I think that to me, that would be one of those, and I also, I did some work with that, and I can't remember, what's the name of the company that made the thing that was like a sleeve that goes around your leg. Moxie, right? Moxie.
Yeah.
Right. Moxie. And I was like, I looked at that and I was like, that's also I thought it was a potential really good thing for mountaineers as well, because again, the same thing. It's like, okay, like you mentioned, can you use it so that you're getting, your pulse oxidation, your level down to a certain place, hold it there, right, for 5 minutes and then recover. And then when it recovers, okay, that lets you now go again, right? And it would actually give you these kind of ideas about, well, when should you actually do the second interval? Or when should you do another, stat or something like that? So I always thought that would be a great way to use that tool, especially in the mountaineering community and the cycling community too. It just never really caught on. I'm not sure exactly why, because just power meters are so easy in our world.
Yeah. If you've been wondering whether one-on-one coaching is the right next step for your training, this is the month to find out. Sign up for coaching and receive a free 30-minute call with one of our specialists. Visit uphillathlete.com to learn more. Now, back to that show. There's one that I personally have no experience with, but I know that that's big in cycling, and some other coaches on our team and Uphill Athlete have experience. We've talked about it a little bit internally, but the core body temperature and heat training, and I think we should separate those. But heat work has gotten kind of serious in cycling, from what I can tell. And people are using these core sensors. Yeah. Where are we in the kind of hype-disillusionment adoption cycle?
Yeah. I think that they're good for people who are training specifically for a hot event, right? It doesn't, I don't think there's any
acclimatization to heat.
Yeah. There's not really a use case scenario unless you're doing it for a specific event. I've worked with a bunch of athletes now who've used them, and they're really good. They work really, really well. This past couple of years, master national championships have been in Augusta, Georgia in August of all times in all places. I mean, just, 90% humidity, 90 degrees, blazing hot sun, just brutal. Right. And so, for when you're training for a really hot event, then it makes perfect sense, because you can go out and say, okay, I need to get my core body temperature to 102. And once I get it to 102, then I know that I'm now simulating what it's going to be when I'm just at, riding around and this temperature. And so now I need to start doing intervals, and I need to keep my core body temperature up to do that. So I think that there's some good use case scenarios for that. I've coached a bunch of race car drivers as well. And so, it's a great thing for race car drivers, because they're in cars, and we can do some real heat acclimatization on their bicycles. Tons of these guys ride bicycles and are super fit now. And so it's like, oh, well, we can really get them ready to be in a hot car, especially if they're doing something like 24-hour Le Mans or 12-hour Sebring or something like that, where it's
cool.
Yeah, they're going to be in a car for a while, a 2-hour stint or 2.5-hour stint or something in the car.
Yeah. As a closet car guy, I kind of like the idea of that. I've worked with like endurance motor, like I have worked with athletes who've done like the Baja 1000, but motorcycle, and stuff like that. And that was also fun. It's really fun as a coach to get these left field challenges that you kind of have to like deconstruct what you know and reconstruct it for a new thing. So, and we have quite a bit of experience, and particularly Chantel Robitaille, who I believe our director of coaching, she's got a lot of experience with heat training, and also the crossover between heat training and acclimatization. There's some very good science that's been shown that to be effective that we've been using internally as well, in addition to the normal baric hypoxic training. So that's really interesting. I want to keep us going. What about substrate utilization? Substrate utilization, that's a big tongue twister for me. It's something that's now been made visible in TrainingPeaks. They call it Fueling Insights, I believe. Sort of a carb versus fat breakdown of a workout. What are your thoughts? Where are we on the cycle?
Yeah. I'm skeptical of this, because I think that this is, if you go in and you do a VO2 max test and you're getting your expired gases and they know, you can tell exactly what your utilization is of fat, carbs and stuff. So, I think that there's some places for it. I don't know if it's like, it's something that we can do a lot with. The fat burning mechanism, right, is really fascinating. And, our ability to use carbs is really fascinating. I came from cycling into climbing and mountaineering after I retired from cycling, and I essentially was very much a carbohydrate addicted addict. And I would read these stories of guys like Steve House who would go up mountains for 24 hours and 48 hours with like a Hershey bar and a liter of water. And then I'm like, how are they doing that? Like, they're not even eating. I want
to say on the Slovak Direct, when we did 60 hours, we planned 48 and we brought 48 goo packets per person for 3 guys.
That's
which was so heavy. When we picked up our backpack to go, we actually this weighs too much. We just reached in and grabbed a couple handfuls of goo packets, just threw them back in the tin because we didn't eat them all. We didn't even come close to eating them because we just couldn't. You know what happened. Everybody listening probably knows what happens after we tried to live on goo for 2 days. So I have to say I'm a little bit skeptical too. I think it's super interesting. We should do another deep dive into sort of the physiology of this stuff. Just could be on the technology topic though. So one of the things that is not yet here, but I think some people are trying, I know people are trying, continuous lactate monitoring.
Yeah.
What's holding this up, and what would change if we had lactate monitoring in real time?
Right. I think that I think that there's not too much holding them up, really, to be honest, because it's very similar to the continuous glucose monitor. And it's the continuous glucose monitor, and we'll talk about this in a second, but the lactate monitor is going to be a similar thing where it's got a little filament that goes in what's called your interstitial fluid, right? So that's that fatty layer of your skin, right? And it goes in that area. And then, this little filament has a specific oxidase on it. There's a glucooxide on the one for glucose monitors. So the lactate one is going to have a different one. And so I think that's going to be there. But to me, the issue at this point is the fact that that different muscles are going to have different levels of lactate, and I think that's the the issue. It's like, okay, well, if I'm riding my bicycle and
It's
I'm at
local.
my limit, right? Yeah, my quads are burning, okay, but of course my triceps aren't. And if the thing's measuring at my triceps, then is it going to get the data? Is not going to get the data, So I think that's the big hold up at this point is the fact that it is localized. So I think that they're hopefully working on it. If that comes around, I see it similar to being actually in the respiratory rate where it allows you to reach okay, I need to reach this minute ventilation number. And I need to hold it for this many minutes. It's like, oh, I can reach this lactate level and I can hold it for this many minutes. And then when my lactate comes back down, then I can go again. Right. And so I can continue to create this stress, this training stress, be real clear with the training stress. So I think the potential is there. I just don't know if it's going to be, ability to do it really well. So we'll see.
Yeah. By the time this airs, it's not quite available yet. We're still in the testing phase, but we developed some code internally to measure aerobic threshold over time in the same way a coach does, you probably don't have to have people go and do an aerobic threshold test. If you want to know their aerobic threshold, you can just go and look at some of their workouts, and you can go into TrainingPeaks and you can just pull out blocks where they're at their zone 2 or whatever number you want to use for whatever system you're using. And you can figure it out within plus or minus a beat or two. Right. And so, I think that this is going to be a non-invasive way to do it. And we're going to roll this out with our training group athletes first, because we have a nice control group of about 100 people right now where we can have them in there using this. And it's going to be backwards looking, and it's going to basically calculate it on a weekly basis. Of course, you could calculate it daily, but it would be all over the place, right? And it doesn't make sense. And we've done that, so we have to smooth it out and show it to people graphically and numerically and so on. So that's sort of an interesting. I'd love to give you a under the hood look at that sometime. It'd be fun. I think you would enjoy seeing that as being a tech expert that you are.
That's cool. That'd be fun. Yeah. Definitely.
So let's talk about your domain, continuous glucose monitoring. Yeah. I wanted to kind of set aside some specific time for this and go pretty deep into it, as you've just published a book about it. But also, I think it's really interesting where it is in this hype disillusionment adaptation. I'm going to get that before the end of this. Hype disillusionment adaptation sort of cycle.
Right.
A few years ago, we had this company, Super Sapiens, and they were really pushing it, and it was getting a lot of PR, if technology can get a PR. And my outside view, I never tried it because with a lot of these things, with training in tech, I'm actually usually not an early adopter. I'll be honest. I'm more of a wait and see camp guy. And so I sort of watched in sort of 2022, a lot of people were using them, but then it seemed like everybody I knew had taken them off by 2023. So where are we? Where do you see this? And how should we think about this technology as endurance athletes?
Yeah. Big question. So I think that it's interesting, right? Super Sapiens came along. Phil Sutherland, the guy he was a pro cyclist, and he's the owner of the Team Type 1 pro cycling team, and has been around for a long time. And he's a Type 1 diabetic and has been using continuous glucose monitors for a really long time. And he came into the world and realized this is going to change everybody's world athletically. And was very successful in raising a lot of money and creating Super Sapiens. And I think that actually kind of that was a really good thing. And then at the same time, it was not a great thing because it would have been, it's going to follow the same kind of cycle as power meters somewhat. In the fact that, you get one and you don't know what to do with it. Like, what does this number mean? Like, what does 120 milligrams per deciliter mean? Is that good if I have that when I wake up in the morning? Is that bad if I have that when I wake up in the morning? Is that good if that's what it is when I'm training, or is that bad? And where should it be? And so there's this lack of knowledge. There's this lack of education on it. And so he was able to basically like just pump the whole system full of all of these things and get everybody on it before they were ready to receive it, before they were ready to there was any information about it and how to use it. Like, how do I actually use this? Nobody knew. And so, that's what basically I did. I spent the last, 4 years, researching this, learning it, figuring it out, and writing the book, Training and Competing with a Continuous Glucose Monitor, so that there would be this education, so that you could say, okay, gosh, I can get Hunter's book and I can get a CGM and I can read his book while I'm using a CGM, and I'll understand what happens when I get this glucose spike, or what happens when I get this trough, or what happens when I get this thing we call the slow slide or whatever. So I think it's in a place right now where, it's an educational state. So I was like, we had this big hype. It kind of came down because nobody knew what to do with it. And now we're here, and now it's like, okay, in order for it to come back up again, people have got to understand how to use it. And once they understand how to use it, then it's like, oh, wow, this is a really amazing tool. And I can see using this on a regular basis now that I know how to use it. So I think we're in that kind of phase right now at the bottom. I'm hoping we're at the beginning of the uphill climb for that.
Okay.
So yeah.
So you briefly described earlier how a CGM works. And I think for those that are really curious, you need to go get your book and get all the knowledge and wisdom. But you did state, as I understood it, that CGMs are not for everyone. So I want to understand who shouldn't be wearing one, and how do you as a coach kind of decide or triage that decision with an athlete?
Yeah. I think that the people who probably shouldn't wear one of these things are also the same folks who probably shouldn't use power meters. They just get obsessed with the numbers, and I think those are those folks who just become so obsessive about something that it hurts their performance. When you get one of these things, the first thing you realize is that, like, oh my God, my glucose went to 200, and it's a huge spike, and it goes up and it comes down, and it goes back up and it comes down, and you're like, what is happening? Right. And then, the natural inclination is like, I'm just never going to eat carbs again. Right. I'm just going to flatline my glucose. Right. I'm just never going to eat carbs. And it's like, no, that's not the answer. Going keto is not the answer.
Yeah.
And so, we need carbs. We are endurance athletes. We need tons and tons of carbs. And it's a natural cycle. It's a natural thing to have glucose spikes. That's normal. And so I think that's where, if somebody just gets so freaked out about the numbers going up and then coming down, and, they have to realize, like, okay, that's okay. It's okay. I'm not having a heart attack. Nothing's happening here. It's just normal physiology. You've been doing it for 30 years, 40 years of your life. You just didn't know.
Right. I think that's great guidance. I think that it's also really timely that all these athletes, both serious amateurs and professionals, are training and racing on more carbohydrate than ever before, and going faster than ever before, sometimes pretty dramatically faster. And so it is like, I think that's a really, in a way, a healthy thing for us to realize that eating is good when you're an athlete. You need to eat. You need to eat actually quite a lot. And to that point, endurance athletes run higher daytime glucose than the general population. And how do you help people understand that? Is it a problem to manage, or is it just a different normal because we're endurance athletes?
Yeah, it's definitely a different normal because we're endurance athletes, and I would say there's probably a very large percentage of us, and probably lots of people listening to this right now, that they've gone and had their HbA1c tested by their doctor in their blood, and it's been kind of high. It's been like maybe borderline pre-diabetic. And they're like, your doctor's like, you're pre-diabetic. And you're like, but I'm like super fit and healthy and 10% body fat, and I just climbed Mount Everest and all this stuff, right? And it's like, no way, right? And that's right, no way. Because HbA1c measures what's called the glycation of the hemoglobin molecule. So basically how much glucose attaches itself to the hemoglobin molecule over a period of time. All right. Now, so it's an average of an average, and at a population thing, it's probably a pretty good thing. Okay. But for us as endurance athletes, imagine, right? Okay, I'm going out for a 6-hour training ride. I'm going to keep my glucose over 120 for most of that 6 hours. It's going to be going between 120 and 180 for that whole time. If I let it go below 120, I'm eating again. And then afterwards, I'm coming back. Now I'm having a recovery shake with tons of carbs in it. Now my glucose goes through the roof, which you want, because you want a glucose spike afterwards, because that's releases insulin. Insulin is the key that opens the door to the cell and puts all that glucose back in the cell to replenish your glycogen stores. And then an hour later, I'm having another meal now to get more glucose in to replenish more glycogen stores. My glucose goes high again. And if I'm doing that same thing the next day, I'm probably having another meal before I go to bed, because now I've got to get even more replenishment before I do this again the next day. So you could have a day where your average glucose is 130. As an endurance athlete. And it's going to say you're freaking diabetic, maybe, but no, you're not, right? It's a transitory thing, right? It's one thing if you're just sitting on the couch and, getting fat, and you're just eating chips and candy bars and Cokes and drinking Cokes, right? It's not moving anywhere. Whereas we are using it. We're taking it in, we're using it. It's a transitory state. It's constantly being shuttled in and out of these cells and moving. So it's not something to worry about. What I look at which I think is a better measurement as an endurance athlete, if you're not in a really heavy training state where you have day-to-day really hard workouts, right? You can just have a normal dinner at night. And you have a dinner at let's say 6 o'clock or something. And you go to bed and your glucose goes below 100 milligrams per deciliter and stays there all night long. You wake up in the morning, you are A-okay, right? That means you don't have any insulin resistance. That means that your cells are working correctly. They're letting the glucose come in, and insulin's working correctly. All these things are happening, and you're good. Now, if you're an endurance athlete and you ate your day meal at 6 and you're not training the next day, and you go to bed and your glucose is 180 and it still is 150 when you wake up in the morning, okay, you know what? Maybe you need to talk to your doctor. You may have some insulin resistance at that point. So there could be so many things going on. Diabetes is caused by lots of different things. But that's where I think that, just keep that in mind. As endurance athletes, our glucose levels are going to be much higher than the normal population.
Do you see CGMs as a performance device, or is it a behavioral management device?
It's both. It's both. It's a performance device in the fact that it allows me, number one, to So let's say maybe not in mountaineering so much, but in cycling for sure, and in other sports like running.
Running for sure. Ultras.
Ultras, triathlons, things that start really hard, then we want to prime our system, right? So it's like my glucose is sitting at 110 or whatever before an event. Let's say that's some kind of a race or something. And actually, I need to get my glucose to 140 because that's really where my optimal performance zone is for glucose. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to slam a gel 10 minutes before the race start, right? Like I may be on the start line and I'm squirting a gel in my mouth, because I want my glucose to come up, and then the race starts and I'm already 140. And so I'm priming the system. Then during that event, then I'm now saying, okay, I need to keep it so that it stays above 120. And so I'm looking at it occasionally every 5, 10, 15 minutes or whatever. Okay, cool. It's good. I'm 130. I'm 140. Oh man, now it's 125. Oh, now it's 120. Oh crap. I just went to 115. I need to eat before it gets too low. So I'm using it that way as a performance tool during the event. And then for afterwards too, I'm just ensuring that I'm getting enough carbs afterwards. Do I get a spike up to 180 or even 200 milligrams per deciliter afterwards with my meal or my recovery shake or whatever, so I can replenish
200?
Oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah, that takes some work, right? To get. Yeah.
Oh no, not like that. I can do it, no problem.
It was like, just give you the pass the pasta.
Exactly.
Yeah, when I was training and climbing full time, and that was my job, it was shocking how much of my week was spent on shopping, food prep, and eating.
Yeah.
That was like a big part of my job. Like took up a huge part of my week. Just those things.
Yeah.
You
totally.
eat so much when you're training hard. And our recreational athletes that are also, I think it's also really good for them because so many of them, they're going to the office, they're sitting at their desk, they're skipping lunch, they're having a bagel for breakfast and three cups of coffee, and then on the other side of it, like we had an athlete once, he shall remain anonymous, but we nicknamed him the Cookie Monster because he ate a bag of cookies that's what he brought to work every day. It was like a commercial bag of like chocolate chip cookies. And that was what he had. That was his food. He thought that was totally, that's a different problem, right? But I think I wanted to segue into this sort of behavior change because there can be quite a wide range of perceptions as to what healthy diet and what healthy eating looks like. And how do you leverage this technology if you're trying to get a handle on your own kind of healthy eating as an athlete?
Yeah. And so the other piece too is that, when you do this multi-day stuff, right? When you're doing multi-day, you have to almost go to bed stuffed, right? And I do cycling camps. I do like 6 or 8 cycling camps a year. And I recently just finished one and and we go out to dinner every night and I put everybody on my camp on a CGM so we can look at their data. And that way I can start to change some of their behaviors. And, after like the first 2 nights, I was just kind of carefully watching what people were eating and ordering at the restaurant, and just watching. And, they were ordering normal stuff, it was like protein heavy, some vegetables, maybe some carbs, but it wasn't a lot of carbs. And so then after like the second day, people aren't recovering super well. And so then I said, okay, now what I'm going to do is I call the restaurant ahead. I'm going to order everybody a big bowl of pasta. They have to have the pasta with their normal meal, or I'm ordering everybody a big baked potato. They have to have that with their normal meal, and everybody's got to eat it, and so then that way, all of a sudden they're like, what? We got to eat all this food. I'm like, yeah, you have to eat all this food because you're not eating enough carbs because Some of them are even going hypoglycemic at night. They would come in the morning like, man, my glucose went down to 70 overnight. And I'm like, your glucose should never go to 70 overnight. If you're training like we're training, that's way, way too low. You're not recovering. You're not getting enough glucose in to recover your glycogen stores. So getting that to change, and then changing the way that they eat food, the order that you eat food in is really important. So the way that we eat, the order we should eat in is that I call it kind of food stacking. So you kind of stack your food in your belly. So the first thing you do is, first off, if you're at a restaurant and they put bread on the table, don't eat it, right? That's the last thing you should eat. You're going to eat your carbs last, right? So don't even eat. You got to be disciplined. But you do a salad first, and you do vinegar on the salad. Don't do oil. Don't do a bunch of crap on there. Just put vinegar on it. Balsamic vinegar is great for you. It contains acetic acid, and it works in 3 different ways to help make your cells more available to uptake glucose, to help lower a glucose spike as well. So that's the first thing you stack in, is a bunch of fiber from your salad with vinegar. Then on your plate, right, you got veggies, you got protein, you got carbs. I'm going to eat all my veggies now. So I'm going to stack more fiber in now.
Yeah.
Right? I'm going to get all that in now, because there's a lot of nutrients right there. You need all those nutrients and vitamins and fiber in next. Then I'm going to eat my protein source. I'm going to eat all that. I'm not eating and picking between these things, right? I'm focused on one thing. I'm eating all my veggies, and then I'm eating all my protein, and I'm saving my carbs for last. And that comes at the top of the stack. And so now what happens is, as you digest this, all of the nutrients are getting digested in, and then those carbs come in. Your glucose doesn't go quite as high, so you don't have to have quite as much insulin, right? Your pancreas doesn't overshoot. Essentially what happens is it doesn't know how much food it's getting, right? It has no clue. It's like, I'm just going to send a bunch of insulin out, right? And it's like, oh, based on some of the carbohydrates and glucose coming in. So it doesn't overshoot, and you have a lower glucose spike, and you've also created this situation where now I'm getting a lots of good food in my body, and instead of filling up with empty stuff, like, oh, if I just ate my pasta first, my glucose would go really high, but there's not a lot of nutrition in pasta, right? It's just carbs. It's not like a bunch of vitamins and fiber and all antioxidants and all the really important stuff that you need too. So that's really key. So changing that behavior is critical, is to make sure that you can really change that behavior as well from the order that you eat. So it's both. It's both a tool for behavior and also performance. So
where does this, like we talked about kind of the hype that was fueled by super sapien, kind of, we're maybe coming out of the trough of disillusionment. What does what does the long-term adaptation of this look like? We also think about like sensors. How long do they last? A couple of weeks, and sometimes they might fall off, and you have to pay for each one. What is worth it? Like, how much? What is the value this brings? Is this something that you want people to use all the time? Is this something you want them to use for a training block so they can learn something from it for, I don't know, 4 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks? Or how do you coach people on that?
Yeah. Great question. I think you need 6 months of data, right? So you need to wear one of these things and commit to it for 6 months to start, because 6 months incorporates enough life experiences, right? You're going to go on vacation, you're going to get sick, you're going to train hard, you're going to have rest weeks, you're going to have stressful weeks at work. Like, you need to see all the responses and how that changes your glucose with the foods you eat, and as you change your diet too. So I think you've got to have 6 months of data to start with. Once you get to 6 months, then it's like, okay, I have a very good understanding of what, makes my glucose change in one way or the other. At that point, then, it's like, okay, I'm going to use a sensor when I have a really hard training block, and I need to make sure that I'm training very focused, and I'm keeping my glucose in the right levels, and I want to nail all these workouts and recover. So I do that when I have a hard training block, and then also when I have an event. Like, okay, if I've got this event coming up 2 weeks before the event, I'm going to start using a CGM, because now I need to make sure that, one, are my numbers good enough? Do I have my glycogen stores full leading up to the event? Then I want to have it during the event itself. And if that event is, a trip to some big mountain in Nepal, then, man, take your glucose, take a stash of them. And then that way you've got them and you know what you're doing. I did, what was it, 3 years ago? I did the Everest trek, and did Kali Patar and,
amazing. Everyone should do this.
Pass and all that stuff. It's so much fun, but I had my glucose monitor on the whole time, and I was making sure I was staying fueled the entire time that I was doing that. It was a huge difference. So, yeah.
That's interesting. Did you notice the change of diet because you were eating rice and lentils, like affects how much you needed to eat and that kind of thing? Or was it not such a, maybe the cuisine and those tea houses has improved since my day, spending a lot of time over there. But is that
all about power, 24 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's, it just really lets you, it makes you so aware of what you need to eat. And I think that was the key, right? Is that, all those things. Okay. Yeah, sure. Lentils and rice, they're going to create a glucose spike, and that's fine. Right. Again, whatever, you're an athlete, you're replenishing, you're fueling for the next, the next hike, you're fueling for getting to the next spot before you camp. So that's totally fine. And I think that more so is like, oh man, did I get enough food today? And you can really tell that, when your glucose levels, like, man, my glucose has been 100 for the past 6 hours. What am I doing? I'm not fueling enough. I feel fine, but I'm not fueling enough for tomorrow. And I think that's a real critical piece.
One of my early mentors, there was a super experienced expedition climber. He was a leader on the third expedition I ever went on in the Himalaya, in the Karakoram, and he made this comment. He said he can always tell who's going to do well in the expedition by watching them at dinner, and whoever eats the most, those are the people that are going to do the best. And of course, me being like 28 or whatever, I took that as like as a gauntlet thrown.
It was a challenge, man. I'm going to win this.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not competitive, but
that's awesome.
And again, maybe like once my ego processed that, I did. There is something really there, like on these expeditions. Also, because you are at high altitude, you're not metabolizing food the same way you do at lower elevation because of the change in oxygen availability and so on and so forth. So there is a lot to it. I'm really glad that the focus is on eating enough. And that's the conversation we're having, because I think there's been a lot of damage done by the conversation being, hey, you're eating too much, which as a climber, I heard many times, and some of us were more susceptible to that message than others, unfortunately. But I think that this is a really good development. Yeah. Let's switch back to tech.
Okay.
Just kind of winding things down here. What is the smallest viable tech stack you'd put on? Let's call them a serious, but not a pro endurance athlete, like a serious amateur.
Yeah. The smallest one, I would just say a Garmin watch, right?
Okay.
I think a Garmin watch is it's got a lot of features, right? You get your sleep data, you get your heart rate variability data, you can track your workouts, you can, get your heart rate, resting heart rate, it's got a bunch of things. So the Phoenix 7 or the Phoenix 8 Pro, they're solid.
Yeah. And what is your preferred tech stack?
Yeah. I mean, I would say Garmin watch still. I would say for sure a CGM as well. I think that after that, from a cycling perspective, we got to have a power meter. But if it's not cycling, then a real heart rate monitor. Especially if you're so the Garmin heart rate is not super great when you're working out, right? It's okay. It's not super great. If you take your watch and you turn it to the inside, right? It's going to be that sensor is going to be much better and much closer to the skin that those photo sensors are, those light sensors. So then that's better. But still, if you really want to know what your heart rate is, I really like the Wahoo armband. I don't want to wear a chest strap. I wore chest straps for 30 years. I'm so done with chest straps.
Me too.
And I'm like, put that on my arm, and I've compared both of them. They're really, really close and super good. So I just wear a chest strap. I put the sensor so it's on the inside of the bicep so that it's also really thin skin right there. It gets a good reading. So heart rate monitor right there. And I think that would be it.
We basically require that for all the athletes we coach. That's on our minimum tech stack because we don't have the power meter, right? So, but
makes sense.
Really, really great to kind of hear all your perspective on this. So, let's talk about what happens as CGM kind of progresses in this adoption cycle. 10 years from now, what's that going to look like? Or will we be using something that we don't have yet?
Right. Oh man, I would love to have a crystal ball.
Right.
I think that it's still going to be there because diabetes is such a huge issue, right? It's such a huge issue for so many people. It's very for type 1 diabetics who have continuous insulin pumps. They're connected to those pumps so they can really titrate their insulin out in a very, very controlled way. Type 1 diabetics are living longer and longer lives than they've ever lived because of this technology, which is amazing. So that's really cool. Type 2 diabetics who do produce insulin, but just have, lack of exercise and very poor eating habits, essentially, they're still going to all be out there. So I think that from the perspective we're going to see in the next 10 years is just like any of these things, the price is going to come down. They're going to become, a little bit smaller. They're already pretty small now. I would love to think that there are going to be sensors out there that you don't have to insert into your interstitial fluid, that just is a wearable itself, a true kind of, okay, I can get the information from our skin. Apple's been working on this for a long time. It's not as easy as it might seem. So maybe that nut will be cracked. If it does, right? I mean, to me, that would be the ideal dream, right? Is Apple cracks it and then they send an update to everybody's Apple Watch, and overnight 50 million people all of a sudden know their glucose on their Apple Watch. And that would be absolutely amazing to see.
Yeah, that would be amazing to see that. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put it past them. So last kind of closing, for the athlete who wants to do this right, isn't sure how to start with all of this, what's the one thing you want to tell them?
Yeah, great question. I think that number one, kind of back to your question about the tech stack. Do research on which thing you want, which device that you want, I think is really important. Because if you don't do that, you might purchase something that doesn't really work for what you're trying to accomplish. Yeah. So I think that's really critical. So do enough research, listen to your coach, so that your coach is going to always have good advice for you about which ones to get. And so I think that's really important. And then number two, give yourself 6 months. You've got to have this relationship with the data. right? You have to understand, back to the beginning of our conversation, what's my perceived exertion? What do I feel like? And what do these numbers say? So like you can start to understand this association, have this real personal connection. Give yourself 6 months of life experiences of hard training, getting sick, vacation, all that stuff. So you got it in there. And then number 3, use the tool the way it's supposed to be used, right? So like if you've got I'm doing specific intervals and I need to be between this heart rate and this heart rate, or this ventilatory threshold, or ventilatory minute ventilation and this minute ventilation, or this glucose and this glucose, then nail them, right? Like do those intervals, right? And do them right. And use the tool itself. I mean, the athletes, and I know you know this too, Steve, you see this, I'm sure, in all the athletes that you guys coach, all the athletes we coach, right? The athletes that do 90% of the training plan that we give them crush it, right? They crush it. And so that, I think that, just
consistency.
Really, consistency. Oh my gosh. So those are the 3 takeaways there.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share all your knowledge and perspective on all of this. It's been amazing. We'll have links to all the information, including your books on the page with the podcast. And thanks so much. It's great to reconnect with you, and we'll stay in touch.
Awesome, Steve. What an honor. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Hey, real quick before you go, everything we publish, the articles, new podcast episodes, and the live webinars are announced first in our newsletter. You can elect to receive between 1 and 3 newsletters a month. They're written by myself and the coaching team. And if you want them, sign up at uphillathlete.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.